and I met victims of human trafficking, women and children. I held babies who had been trafficked. And what gets a young drug addicted, because they addict all these women to drugs when they're trafficked, young drug addicted mother to break free from her captor, they were sending her to New York. And when they were going to do that, what did? They were going to kill her baby. And that's what got her to break away and get to a safe house. So I am committed to fighting human trafficking alongside you.
This may look like a routine confirmation exchange, but it's actually a stress test of how the federal government decides whose safety counts. What's really being tested here is whether law enforcement institutions are still allowed to use their full authority when politics makes enforcement uncomfortable. This raises broader questions about whether public safety policy is driven by law or by ideology. In this video, we'll break down how a single Senate exchange exposes the hidden cost of federal inaction and what it means for the future of justice in America.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I know you're so pleased that we're about to the end of the day. And we thank you so much for your time and your dedication and your desire to serve. And there are several things that we work together on here in this committee, and we will need your help. Online privacy, we have never addressed. Senator Blumenthal and I have worked on that. The Kids Online Safety Act, which we are looking forward to finishing here this under President Trump's leadership so that we can protect children in the virtual space. And another portion of the work that I put a good bit of time into is combating human trafficking. And I know you have such a background in that, and we are so appreciative that you bring that background to the AG's position, because this is an issue that has languished. Now, Senator Cruz mentioned the 300,000 children that are not accounted for nearly 2 years ago. I wrote the HHS secretary. It was at about 100, it was at 75,000 at that point, and the number has increased. And there are steps that could be taken that this administration, the Biden administration, has tossed to the side. We have legislation to address those. But General Bondi, this is something that you can begin to do on day one. This administration has stopped doing fingerprints. They have stopped doing DNA testing. And because of that, we know that about 40% of the kids that come to that border are being trafficked. And there is a way to put an end to this. So we have, we think creating a database, a human trafficking database at DOJ, is a good step forward. We do have legislation on that. Another thing that we're working on is having Child Protective Services actually record the interviews with children and adults to help to protect these children. But I would really like to get your commitment on the record for your help and a statement about the work that you have done in human trafficking and your commitment to ending that in our country.
Thank you, Senator. And I have not yet reviewed your legislation, but I would love to review that legislation. Yeah, I learned about the fingerprinting and the DNA when I was at the border a few months ago, and I really couldn't believe that. And while I was there, I went to a rape crisis center, and what I saw and learned at that border, there is nothing humane happening at that border.
No.
And so many women and children are being trafficked coming into this country. And when I was Attorney General for the state of Florida, I went to Mexico, and I went to a safe house, and I met victims of human trafficking, women and children. I held babies who had been trafficked. And what gets a young drug addicted, because they addict all these women to drugs when they're trafficked, young drug addicted mother to break free from her captor, they were sending her to New York. And when they were going to do that, what did? They were going to kill her baby. And that's what got her to break away and get to a safe house. So I am committed to fighting human trafficking alongside you, and I have not yet read your legislation.
I appreciate that. We appreciate so much your commitment to that. There is nothing compassionate about what is going on at that southern border, and we will need your attention to fix those issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just moments ago, in a chamber that has grown weary from hours of testimony, Pam Bondi delivered a line that cut through the procedural noise like a flash of lightning. She said, with unmistakable gravity, that there is nothing humane happening at the southern border. It was not a slogan, it was not a talking point, it was the culmination of what she described as firsthand encounters, policy failures, and a system that has drifted far from the values it claims to uphold. In that instant, the room shifted. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, because they did not describe an abstract policy dispute. They described a moral reckoning. What Bondi revealed was not simply a critique of one administration or another. It was an indictment of a process that has been allowed to hollow out the idea of responsibility itself. When she spoke of fingerprinting and DNA checks being halted, she was not reciting a bureaucratic footnote. She was pointing to a deliberate decision to turn away from basic safeguards that exist for a reason. Those safeguards are not about paperwork. They are about knowing who is entering, who is responsible for whom, and who might be at risk when those lines are blurred. When those systems are stripped away, chaos fills the vacuum, and chaos always preys on the vulnerable. In that exchange, a senator laid out a grim arithmetic. Tens of thousands of young people unaccounted for, a number that has only grown with time. Bondi did not dispute it. Instead, she tied it to what she had seen herself. She talked about standing at the border, about visiting a crisis center, about walking through a safe house in another country and looking into the eyes of those who had been passed from one handler to another like commodities. She spoke of holding infants, of hearing stories that no one should ever have to tell. Even without graphic detail, the weight of those experiences was unmistakable. It was the weight of human lives reduced to entries in a broken system. This is where policy becomes something more than legislation. It becomes a test of whether a government still remembers why it exists. A state can draft laws, build agencies, and hold hearings, but if it forgets the people those structures are meant to serve, it begins to operate on autopilot, guided by convenience instead of conscience. Bondi's words expose that drift. By highlighting the suspension of basic identification measures, she was drawing a line between intention and outcome. You can claim to be compassionate, but if your choices create an environment where exploitation flourishes, that claim rings hollow. There is a deeper truth here about power and accountability. Governments do not act in a vacuum. Every policy decision sends ripples outward. When leaders decide that enforcement is too burdensome or verification too politically fraught, they may believe they are easing pressure. In reality, they are shifting that pressure onto those least able to bear it. The hearing revealed how quickly good intentions, untethered from practical safeguards, can produce the opposite of what was promised. That is not a failure of ideology alone. It is a failure of stewardship. Bondi's commitment to review legislation and to work alongside lawmakers was not a mere procedural nod. It was a signal that, for her, this issue is not theoretical. It is personal. When someone speaks of walking into places where people are trying to rebuild their lives, of hearing stories that linger long after the doors close, they are carrying more than briefing notes. They are carrying memory. And memory has a way of cutting through the fog of politics. It forces us to confront what is actually happening, not just what we wish were happening. The phrase, "nothing humane," resonates because it challenges the audience to measure reality against rhetoric. We hear endlessly about compassion, about openness, about reform. But compassion without structure is not kindness. It is neglect wearing a softer mask. Structure without compassion is cruelty. The balance between the two is what defines a just system. The hearing laid bare how far that balance has tilted. When basic checks are abandoned and responsibility is diffused across agencies that no longer coordinate, the result is not freedom. It is a free-for-all that rewards the worst actors and punishes those who have no choice but to move through it. This moment also reveals something about the courage it takes to speak plainly in Washington. It is far easier to hide behind acronyms and procedural language. It is safer to talk about frameworks and pathways than about lived experience. Bondi chose the harder route. By recounting what she had seen, she forced the room and the country to confront the human cost of bureaucratic decisions. In doing so, she reminded us that leadership is not measured by how well one avoids controversy, but by how willing one is to tell uncomfortable truths. The broader political context cannot be ignored. Border policy has become one of the most polarizing issues in American life, often reduced to slogans shouted across cable news panels. But in that hearing, it became something else. It became a story about responsibility, about whether a nation still believes that order and dignity must travel together. When lawmakers argue over databases and recorded interviews, they are not debating abstract technology. They are debating whether the state will take seriously its duty to protect those who cannot protect themselves. At the heart of this exchange is a question that has echoed through every era of American history. What does it mean to be a nation of laws and a nation of people? The two are not in conflict unless we allow them to be. Laws exist to give people a fair chance. When they are enforced wisely, they create space for compassion to operate. When they are ignored, compassion becomes a hollow word, spoken in speeches while reality tells a different story. As the gavel fell and the room moved on to the next item of business, the weight of what had just been said did not dissipate. It lingered because it spoke to something larger than one hearing or one nominee. It spoke to the soul of a system that is being asked to decide whether it will continue down a path of convenient neglect or whether it will reclaim the hard work of genuine care. This is why moments like this matter. They cut through the noise and force a reckoning. They remind us that behind every policy debate are real lives shaped by the outcomes. And they remind us that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires attention, engagement, and a willingness to hold leaders accountable when words and actions drift apart. The truth is not always comfortable, but it is always necessary. If we want a country that lives up to its ideals, we must be willing to look unflinchingly at where we fall short and demand better. That is the work of citizenship. That is the work of a free people. Support our work to expose the truth. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.